Every year, the internet uncovers mysteries that seem straight out of a horror movie. A daycare that people swore was hiding something dark, a dead man who nobody could name for 20 years, and a radio signal playing ghostly voices across Oregon. These stories went viral, spawning wild conspiracy theories, Reddit investigations, and even real-world chaos. But the truth behind them is somehow even stranger. You ever hear about the daycare that nobody ever seems to see kids going in or out of? The one with neon green walls, purple doors, and windows plastered over so you can't peek inside. That place is called Fun Times Kid Care. And its story is where curiosity, rumor, and reality crash into each other. It all kicked off in January of 2015, when a Reddit user named DiscoGodfather6922 posted a photo of this strangely decorated building in Salt Lake City, Utah. He claimed that he had lived nearby for years, but he had never seen a single child entering or leaving the place. This post unleashed a complete storm in that community. People slammed the neon green, purple, and yellow building into their feed. The windows were opaque with children's drawings, making it impossible to see in. The playground had laid dormant for years, and some people wrote the building off as abandoned. But others felt a chill down their spine, wondering what's really going on there. Soon the story spread to conspiracy subreddits. Theories bloomed like CIA black sites were there, an Oregon farm, a cult front, a drug operation. Pick your horror. Online sleuths dove in, and the public started to notice, with Vice and the Salt Lake City Tribune creating articles about it. Some claimed neighbors had never ever seen children. Others pointed out that somebody who delivered mail said the interior looked functional, but it always seemed nap time when I came by. Before long, Reddit admins deleted the original thread, citing doxing and harassing behavior toward the daycare owner. But by then, the myth had escaped. Once the rumor mill got going, it was impossible to stop. Some claim they saw grainy pictures inside, a single room, a chair facing a TV showing live footage of another room, but no confirmation on this. Others pointed to how quiet the place always looked. Nobody ever played outside. And some skeptics tried to push back, pointing out the building was registered as a daycare, and there are children cared for inside, just very few at a time. Still, for many, the evidence seemed flimsy, but the legend took a life of its own. Fast forward to 2019, the internet is in full Storm Area 51 mode. Somebody decides, hey, let's storm that creepy daycare. A Facebook event's created called Storm Fun Times Kid Care, They Can't Stop Us All, and over 2,000 users expressed interest. The idea was obviously satirical, but it drew attention, commentary, and even police warnings. Some people actually showed up to peer in the windows or wander near the lot. The owner, Jose Solano, reported attempted break-ins, and he had to beef up security, installing deadbolts and adding cameras. So what does fact-checking reveal about Fun Times Kids Care? The facility is licensed by the Utah Department of Health, and it was registered in May 2013. A state inspection on October 1st, 2021 found no public violations. It appears the center often has very few children under care at a time, sometimes as few as 2, and that helps explain why the place seems empty. Neighbors who attended the daycare decades ago remember a bright, playful environment. Some say the reason you don't see kids outside today is because many are infants and toddlers and are too young to play outside. The building is owned by an LLC called Chunga International, and the land in the building is valued in county records recently at around $313,000. The site has had multiple fresh coats of paint over time, and in 2023 when it was repainted, speculation surged, but the same scheme, green, purple, and yellow, eventually reemerged. No major complaints or scandals around children's safety or abuse have surfaced in public records. The worst noted complaint was from 2017 about record keeping, and that was resolved. One fascinating angle, some locals feel the conspiracy narratives are unfair. They see Funtime Kidz Care as a neighborhood institution serving low-income families, quietly doing its job. One former volunteer said in the 1990s it was called Funtime Daycare and that many children were infants who stayed indoors. Again, this helps explain why the playground's kinda dormant if they have toddlers. Folklorists call this story a contemporary legend, a mix of visual oddity, rumor, and community anxiety. The real twist is not whether the conspiracy is true, but why people believed it so readily. In the end, Funtime's Kidz Care doesn't seem to be a dark secret. It's likely an underutilized daycare, overloaded with speculation because of how weird it looks and how little is known. But the power of mystery is real. Take a painted building, give it covered windows and silence from the community, and that is fuel for the imagination. So here's what I'm left thinking. Mystery doesn't require malevolence. Sometimes it's just lack of information. Rumors travel faster than facts, and sometimes the strangest places are simply more mundane than we want them to be. Our next solved internet mystery begins innocently enough, or at least that's what you tell yourself in the first few seconds. In April 2015, a Reddit user under the name rbradbury1920 posted on the legal advice subreddit describing a horror story that felt like it was unspooling in real time. One morning, they found a yellow post-it note taped to their desk. The handwriting wasn't theirs. The message? A list of errands they claimed they hadn't told anybody about. They tossed the note and they tried to chalk it up to fatigue or daydreaming, just anything to explain it away. Then on April 19th, a second note appeared, this time stuck to the back of the desk chair. In the same odd handwriting, the message said, "Make sure you saved your documents." There was no sign of break-in either. The Redditor, now disturbed, set up a webcam aimed at their workspace, configured to record motion. On April 28th, yet another note. "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you, but it's important we do." That night, the webcam footage was gone. The user's computer recycling bin had been emptied as well, something they were confident that they had not done. Then, on May 1st, a final escalation. A blank post-it note appeared on the outside of their door. And eerily, similar blank post-it notes appeared on other doors in the apartment complex. Suddenly, it felt like their entire building was being folded into the mystery. So at this point, Reddit exploded with theories. Some users suspected sleepwalking or a dissociative episode. Perhaps the person was writing notes themselves but just didn't have memory of it. Others suggested the landlord was entering without permission, or worse, somebody else had access. One of the most compelling and ultimately pivotal suggestions came from a commenter who asked, "Do you have a carbon monoxide detector?" They proposed that low-level CO2 poisoning might explain memory lapses, confusion, and the hallucinations of an intrusion. That simple question turned the adrenaline up. The original poster admitted to suffering from headaches, a subtle but red flag, and they hastily pulled a CO2 detector from its box and tested it in the bedroom. The reading was 100 parts per million. For scale, that's in the danger zone. In a sudden reversal of suspense, the user confessed that most likely they themselves had been writing the notes, but those acts took place in moments they could not remember later. The carbon monoxide poisoning was their silent puppeteer. So either way, what started out as a creeping fear of being stalked became far more terrifying. You could betray yourself without realizing it. Now at the end of the day, you may be asking, why does this story matter? Well, for one, the villain was invisible. Carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, and silent. It is a danger that you need to look out for. Our minds can betray us. Memory lapses, confusion, disorientation, these symptoms mimic psychological breakdowns, but they sometimes have physical causes. And being an armchair detective on the internet can sometimes matter. A stranger's comment prompted this Redditor to test their own home and potentially save their life. Either way, don't dismiss the subtle things. That headache and that strange sense of something off, small anomalies are often the only clues before total catastrophe. You want to hear about how the internet solved a missing persons case? In June of 1995, in rural Greenville County, Virginia, a van carrying two young men veered off the road and crashed into a pair of trees. Both occupants died instantly. One was quickly identified, the driver. He had an ID. The other, a burned, battered, and unrecognizable corpse, he carried no identification. But there were hints. In his pocket, he carried 2 ticket stubs to a Grateful Dead concert, a tie-dyed Grateful Dead shirt, a yellow lighter, and a few quarters. Because of those concert tickets in the band shirt, he earned the nickname the Grateful Doe. Authorities tried everything, from fingerprint comparisons to missing person databases, and nothing matched. He slowly slipped into the abyss of John Doe's, nameless, motionless corpses that had no identification. Years passed and the case went cold. But in 2010, something changed. With the rise of the internet and a community of cold case fans and amateur detectives, they came together and began to shine their lights into the darkness. In 2014, an Australian Redditor known as Grey Metal created a subreddit r/Grateful Doe to crowdsource research, share reconstructions, and spread awareness to solve this cold case. Thousands of people joined, they generated composite sketches, they circulated images widely in forums, Imgur, Facebook, and Deadhead fan groups. Then one day, a user named Steve messaged the moderators. He believed he recognized the person in the composite. He said it reminded him of a former roommate from Illinois, a guy named Jason. Jason had vanished in 1995 and had lived in both Illinois and South Carolina. That tip was passed along, and eventually the composite reached Shannon Callahan, Jason's half-sister. When she viewed the images, she was struck. She went on to say, "It looked like my dad was looking back at me," and she volunteered to take a DNA sample. In December 2015, after months of coordination between law enforcement, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and the Virginia Medical Examiner's Office, DNA tests confirmed that the Grateful Doe was Jason Patrick Callahan, a missing person from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He had been just 19 years old when he died, and his mother, Margaretetta Evans, had never filed a missing persons report, believing perhaps that Jason had simply left on his own. Because of the nomadic, fan-following life of Deadheads and uncertainty about jurisdiction, his absence went unreported. Thus, a man who had roamed, gone unheralded, and died unidentified for 20 years was finally named. His family got closure, and the mystery was no longer myth. So why is the Grateful Doe story so haunting to me? Well, for one, it was a life lost too young with no name, and a small clue, concert tickets and a band shirt, became his legacy for years. The power of collective memory, of strangers across continents piecing together a life from fragments, is honestly kind of amazing, and there's a heartbreak that his own family never knew where he disappeared. Only after they saw a viral image of him did they act. And ultimately, this shows how the internet, which is often looked down on as a bad place, helped bring light and closure to a family. And finally, they say radio is just invisible waves in the air. Voices you can hear but you can't touch. But what if those voices weren't meant for you? What if they were meant to unsettle? And that's actually what happened with 96.7 FM in the Beaverton, Portland area. For a time, it became the frequency of the weird. It was around late 2017 when curious listeners began reporting something strange on 96.7 FM. What they tuned into wasn't top 40 or local talk or even smooth jazz. Instead, it was a loop burst of static, beeps, and noise. Snippets of old speeches like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., NASA audio and telemetry clips from Sputnik and Apollo missions, distorted voices reading letters and half-hearted commands, and then just some grand, disonic music that were interspliced in with all of this. It sounded like a radio haunted by fragments of history and static, and people wondered, is this a prank? A pirate radio station? An art experiment? Or something darker? A YouTube documentary titled Strange Sounds from 96.7 FM went viral, showing clips of the broadcast and fueling speculation. One article in Sound and Vision later described how from 2017 to mid-2018, the frequency transmitted hours of bizarre content: beeps, speeches, space signals, voices, and random audio clips.
KZRYLP, Portland.
Local forums lit up. Who runs this? Is this a number station? Is somebody broadcasting secrets? And eventually the puzzle began to fall apart. In daylight, not in static. The frequency, 96.7 FM in Portland, was tied to a low-power FM station, now known as KNUM-LP. Here's how the pieces line up. Originally, the station had a call sign KZRYLP. The licensee is the Community Alliance of Tenants, a non-profit organization focused on housing justice. The experimental and seemingly random audio content aligns with the station's early broadcast, where they didn't yet have standard programming and they used weird loops to fill the dead air. One plausible theory, the odd audio was broadcasted to satisfy FCC requirements of using the frequency, even if they didn't have polished programming ready. In other words, broadcast something weird so you don't lose your license. Over time, the station settled into a conventional format. KZRYLP changed to KNUM-LP and now broadcast mostly rap and hip-hop, branding itself as 96.7 The Numbers. So what started as a mysterious, unearthly static turned out to be a low-power, legally permitted community station experimenting or improvising with early content. This case is a perfect example of how context changes perception. When you stumble across something strange on your radio dial, cut off from explanations, your brain tends to fill the gaps with mystery, conspiracy, or fear. But what this story really shows is legitimacy can hide in strange places. A non-profit LPFM can sound downright creepy before it finds its voice. Weirdness can be intentional. This broadcast oddity may be a strategy to attract attention or to meet regulatory obligations, not necessarily secret codes from spies. And patience in winning often wins over speculation. Communities, researchers, and media trace these signals from eerie to explainable. So what do you think? Which one of these solved mysteries freaked you out the most? Drop your thoughts below because I try to read every comment and your theory might make it into the next episode. Alright nerds, it turns out vampires are real. Or at least 19th century New England really thought they were. I'm not talking about fancy European aristocrats or the Illuminati sipping blood from crystal goblets. I'm talking about dirt farmers in Rhode Island digging up grandma because they thought she was eating the family. And the craziest part? Newspapers covered it like a sporting event. Welcome to the American vampire pandemic, where tuberculosis teamed up with superstition like The Undertaker and Kane, and science took a dirt nap.
It's 1892, in a small Rhode Island town. A group of men stand around a grave. They've been up all night sharpening shovels, whispering prayers, and passing around lanterns. Because tonight, they're going to dig up a vampire. They weren't alone. For nearly a century, Americans, real ordinary Americans, were convinced the dead were coming back to life. This isn't your classroom history. It's gritty, real, and rarely discussed.
1892, Exeter, Rhode Island. The men who were huddled around the grave are determined. They have already buried too many of their own, and tonight, they're finally going to stop it. Because the Brown family is dying one by one, and the townsfolk think they know why. The dead daughter, Mercy Brown, has turned into a vampire. They believe she's crawling out of her grave at night, draining the life from her family, and crawling back in. Which, I mean, if that's true, that's dedication. I can't even get people to text back after 9 p.m. Either way, the townfolk do the only logical thing: dig her up to check and see if she's been munching on them. To understand this mindset, you have to get inside the 19th century mind. People were dying all over New England from a disease called consumption, what we now know as tuberculosis. It made you pale, thin, cough up blood, and basically it turned you into the Walking Dead before you died, except you don't get a fat check from AMC. And when one person in the family got sick, everybody else did too. You know, how diseases spread. Doctors couldn't explain it, churches couldn't stop it, and when reason and religion fail, fear fills the gaps, which explains most problems throughout history. These real-life Minecraft villagers started to believe something was feeding on the living. So the villagers gathered their shovels, grabbed a lantern, and they hiked out to the Brown family plot like a midnight DLC mission. They dig and dig and dig, and eventually they crack open Mercy Brown's coffin. Now this is when things get really weird if they hadn't already. They expected to find a decomposing corpse, because you know that's usually what happens when you've been dead for a couple months. But when they opened it, Mercy's body was almost perfectly preserved. She didn't look like any of the other Brown family members. There was no bloating, no skeletization. Her body was weirdly intact. And her cheeks still had a bit of color, you know, that little rosiness in them. To the villagers, this isn't just suspicious, she's definitely undead territory, and they started, I guess, high-fiving, thinking they were right. And then they find what they think is the smoking gun or OJ's gloves. They find blood in her heart and in her liver. To them, this is undeniable proof that she's been sneaking out at night for midnight snacks. To modern science, it's called being stored in a cold tomb during a winter. Obviously, she's not going to be decomposed. Turns out, refrigeration works. Who could have thought that? But these guys, they weren't exactly waiting for a CDC report. So they did what anybody clearly not qualified to handle the supernatural would do. They don't call the Ghostbusters, they don't call the Winchesters. They decide to cut out Mercy's heart, burn it to ashes, mix those ashes into a potion, and make her sick brother drink it. Because apparently that was their version of NyQuil. Spoiler alert, it didn't work and he died 2 months later. If you're shocked by this, I don't know any other way to tell you. This wasn't just a one-time thing in Rhode Island either. Cases like this popped up all over New England between the late 1700s and the late 1800s. It was like a low-budget, rural vampire cinematic universe. You had people digging up family members, burning organs, turning the remains into medicine, all while local newspapers were reporting like this. And in today's sports section, the Yankees beat Boston, and the Henderson family burned Uncle Jerry's lungs because he was definitely undead. And honestly, part of why the vampire panic lasted so long is because tuberculosis looks like a curse. People wasted away, they were coughing up blood, they stay pale, and often it spread through families like clockwork. There was no germ theory at the time, no antibiotics, everybody was just going off of vibes and fear. So when little Mercy Brown died in January of 1892, and her brother started showing symptoms, the town didn't see, oh, an infectious disease is here. They saw, Mercy's definitely coming back for seconds. And what the town people did next, honestly, it's straight out of a horror movie. But listen, I gotta stop for a second and talk about how completely crazy this is. You're telling me a whole town of grown adults, some of them farmers and shopkeepers, decided, yeah, Grandma's dead, but she's totally coming back from the grave at night and sucking the life out of little Timmy. Better dig her up and stab her in the heart. And nobody paused for a second and thought, maybe she's just dead. This could be something else. I mean, come on. You had tuberculosis. This wasn't some secret vampire conspiracy. It was literally the flu or the COVID of the 1800s, but way sadder. People were pale, coughing up blood, wasting away, and instead of calling a doctor, they called a shovel. A shovel. And don't get me started on the burn the heart and mix it into a drink thing. Okay, who came up with that? Some guy probably read a sketchy pamphlet and was like, oh, science, I'll solve this. But you know what? Meanwhile, little Timmy is chugging Grandma Ash smoothie like it's a protein shake. This is the level of problem solving we're talking about. Dig up the dead, stab it in the heart, burn it, force the living to drink it. Granted, this makes slightly more sense than, take this cocaine, chap, you got ghost in your blood. This is the perfect storm of ignorance, fear, and superstition. And honestly, I kind of respect the dedication. I mean, if you actually thought vampires were real, wouldn't you do everything to stop them? But at the same time, holy hell. Maybe, just maybe, I don't know, clean the sheets, wash your hands, do something to not spread this around. But nope, vampire smoothie, classic choice. All right, let's bring this home because here's the part that blows my mind. This whole digging up the dead thing, it's literally the 1800s version of a TikTok conspiracy theory. Think about it. You've got people seeing symptoms, no one knows the science, no one trusts the experts, and suddenly the answer isn't research or medicine, it's social proof and fear mixing together. Little Mercy dies. Her brother gets sick. The neighbors say, she's a vampire. She's eating them alive. I don't know how they would have sounded back then, but we'll go with it. And suddenly the whole town is agreeing, like, yup, gotta dig up the body, heart goes in the fire, bonus points if we make a smoothie out the ashes. This is exactly how misinformation spreads today. Someone posts a 30-second video claiming something scary, people see it, they panic, they freak out, they take dangerous action, and then they share it with 14 people, and it works. Boom. An instant viral panic. It's like the chain emails of the early 2000s. Okay, instead of a little dead girl ended up at the end of your bed, it's, we gotta dig up grandma and burn her, she's coming back. It's history repeating itself, just with less powdered ashes and more hashtags. And the wild part is, these townfolk weren't stupid. They were trying to solve a real problem. There was a deadly disease killing their families, they just didn't have the right tools. Instead of doctors or science, they had superstition, folklore, and a shovel. And honestly, in context, you can kind of see the logic. It is absolutely terrifying logic, but logic nonetheless. So next time you scroll TikTok and you see somebody claiming something insane, just remember, people in 1892 Rhode Island were literally stabbing dead bodies in the chest to save their family from imaginary vampires. And somehow, that still makes the internet feel a little less scary, doesn't it? So, what happened to Mercy Brown and her well-intentioned, shovel-wielding neighbors? Well, Mercy, who was already a corpse, she stayed dead. Surprise. Her brother, despite drinking an ash smoothie, he didn't make it, unfortunately, and the rest of the town slowly realized that maybe, just maybe, dead people don't get up and snack on the living. But the panic didn't vanish overnight. Across New England, families dug up loved ones, burned hearts, sprinkled ashes in the hopes of stopping death itself. And newspapers, they chronicled it like primetime drama. In a haunting way, this glimpse into a world where science hadn't caught up is awesome. Fear ran unchecked and superstition was a family heirloom. This is exactly like an episode of Supernatural that I know I grew up watching, but it's awful because it happened to real people. So the next time you hear somebody say, I'm Tim Edward, vampires aren't real, just remember, in 1892, ordinary Americans were standing over graves at midnight, convinced that the dead were walking around. And the dead weren't the only thing they were scared of. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't in the coffin, it's in the mind of the living. And that, my friends, is the terrifying, absurd, unforgettable story of America's last vampire panic. Halloween night. For most people, it's about costumes, candy, and harmless scares. But for first responders, it's different. It's a night when the emergency lines light up for reasons no one can explain. Calls from houses that no longer exist, accidents that leave behind no victims, and voices over the radio that don't belong to anybody alive. Paramedics, police, firefighters, they've all got stories they don't tell at the station. Stories that blur the line between duty and the unknown. Tonight, we're opening their case files, the ones they whisper about in break rooms and remember in their nightmares. These are the first responder files, real calls, real people, and encounters that make even the bravest question what's waiting on the other side. It was Halloween night in 2011 when a paramedic named Ryan got a call he's never forgotten. The dispatch was routine. Elderly female, possible cardiac arrest, 112 Ash Street. Ryan and his partner had been running calls all evening. Fender benders, a few intoxicated partygoers, nothing out of the ordinary. But something about this one felt different. Ash Street was in an older part of town, a narrow stretch lined with sagging porches and flickering jack-o'-lanterns. When the ambulance pulled up, Ryan frowned. The house at 112 didn't look like anybody lived there. The porch was half collapsed, the windows were boarded up, and no lights were on, except for one faint glow coming from an upstairs window. They radioed dispatch to confirm the address. The operator repeated it back, calm as ever. Copy. 112 Ash Street. Caller reported chest pain. Elderly female. Name listed as Evelyn Grant. Ryan grabbed his gear and he walked up the creaking steps and immediately noticed something odd. The door was already open. Not kicked in, not forced, just ajar. Inside, the air was heavy, stale, and the faint smell of smoke lingered, like a campfire that never quite went out. Their flashlights swept over dust-covered furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a dark hallway that led toward the back of the house. EMS, Ryan called out. Evelyn, can you hear me? No answer. Just the faint sound of something creaking upstairs. They followed the noise, step by step, their boots echoing on the old wood floors. At the top of the stairs, they saw it. A flickering orange light spilling out from the bedroom doorway. Ryan's partner whispered, "Maybe that's where she is." They pushed the door open, and inside, the room looked wrong, like time had been stopped. Old photographs were scattered across the dresser, and a rotary phone lay off the hook. And sitting upright in an armchair by the window was an elderly woman. Her head was tilted slightly forward, her skin was pale, and her eyes were half open. Ryan hurried over and set down the bag. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He reached for a pulse. Ice cold. No heartbeat. He checked again. Nothing. As he pulled his stethoscope back, he noticed the light. That strange orange light was coming from behind the curtain. There was no light source, though. The upstairs window faced an empty lot. That glow was just there, hanging in the air, like a firelight with no fire. Ryan called for police backup. His partner stepped out to grab the stretcher, and when Ryan turned back to the chair, the woman was gone. The blanket that had been on her lap was now crumpled in the floor. The chair was empty. He checked the closet, under the bed, in the hallway, everywhere he could think of. Nothing. No sign of anybody leaving the room. He radioed his partner. "She's gone." His partner laughed nervously. "Gone? Like walked out?" Ryan didn't answer. He just stared at the chair. The faint smell of smoke was stronger now. And from somewhere inside the walls, he could hear a faint crackling, like wood catching flame. When the police arrived, they swept the house. No one was there. No footprints, no sign of a recent occupant. The power box outside was even disconnected. A few hours later, dispatch called Ryan back. They double-checked the name on their system, Evelyn Grant. Turns out, she had lived at that address, but she died 20 years earlier, Halloween night, 1991, in a house fire. Her body had been found in the same room upstairs, sitting in that same position. Every Halloween since, Ryan admits he still checks the call logs before he clocks out, just to make sure it doesn't happen again. He says, "I still check the dispatch log every Halloween. That address never leaves me." For most first responders, that call would be enough to quit, or at least to start questioning reality. But Halloween has a way of stacking the strange on top of each other. Because sometimes, the next call isn't just a ghost story. It's a warning. It was Halloween night in 2004. Officer David Morales was about halfway through his shift in a quiet Midwestern town. The trick-or-treaters were mostly home, the streets were emptying out, and the last of the porch lights were starting to click off one by one. David pulled his cruiser down a narrow street lined with old oak trees, the kind that swallow up the street lights and make everything feel darker than it should be. And that's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing all alone on the corner. She was wearing a white dress. Simple, old-fashioned. Not a princess costume, not anything flashy. Just plain, like Little House on the Prairie. In her hand, she carried a small, dented trick-or-treat bucket. David slowed down, rolled down his window, and he called out gently, "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? Where are your parents?" She looked at him, big eyes, pale face, and she said softly,
"I'm trying to find my mommy."
Something about her voice, though, made his stomach twist. David got out of the car and knelt down to her level. He asked where she lived, but she just shook her head and saying she didn't know. He asked what her name was, and she hesitated, then whispered,
Mary?
The air was cold. Her breath didn't fog. David radioed in.
Dispatch, I've got a lost child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, white dress, says her name's Mary, no parents in sight.
Dispatch replied,
Copy that. No missing children reported in your area tonight.
He told the girl to wait just a second while he opened the back door of his cruiser to warm her up. But when he turned around, she was gone. He spun around, did a complete 180. Empty street. No sound but the wind, rustling leaves across the pavement. David called out, Mary? No answer. Then, tap. He heard it. A faint tap on the window of his cruiser. She was sitting in the back seat. Quiet, calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Heart racing, he slid into the driver's seat. All right, Mary, we'll get you home, okay? But when he looked in the rearview mirror, she wasn't looking at him. She was staring out the window. Her lips were moving, whispering something he couldn't hear. David radioed dispatch again.
Dispatch, got the girl in my unit now, heading toward Maine to check for parents.
Static. And then dispatch came back.
Officer Morales, confirm. You said that girl's name is Mary?
He replied,
Yep, that's what she told me. Why?
There was a long pause. Then dispatch quietly replied,
Can you repeat the address you found her at?
And he gave it. Then another pause. Dispatch then said,
Officer, that can't be right. There's no child reported missing tonight. But there was one 40 years ago. A girl named Mary Thompson, hit by a car on Halloween night at that same intersection.
David slammed on the brakes. His cruiser screeched to a stop and he twisted around in his seat. The back seat was completely empty. The doors were still locked, the seatbelt was untouched, but her trick-or-treat bucket was still sitting there. Inside was a single piece of candy, an old, faded peppermint, still in its wrapper. Later that night, David pulled the dash cam footage. You can see it clear as day. He pulls over, you can see him talking to somebody on the edge of the street, a small figure in white. You can even see him open the door and her silhouette climbing in. But what you don't see is her getting out. The footage runs until sunrise. The car never stops again. No door ever opens. David worked a few more years before transferring out of town. He said Halloween never felt the same after that night. Every October, though, he'd still drive that route. Same time, same corner, and every once in a while, he swears he still sees her, standing under that same streetlight, white dress, dented trick-or-treat bucket in hand, still looking for her mom. Cops see it all. The weird, the tragic, and the unexplainable. But even they can't explain a girl that disappears from a cruiser, or tire tracks that somehow disappear in the middle of the road. Still, for some, the scariest encounters don't happen outside. They happen where they should be the safest, like at a church. Halloween night, 1997. A storm was rolling across a small Tennessee town when a firefighter named Jacob Holt and his crew got the call. Dispatch came through at 11:42 p.m.
Possible structure fire, Old St. Mark's Church, off Country Line Road.
Jacob frowned. That building had been condemned for years. It burned once before, a real bad one back in the 70s, and nobody was supposed to be there. But as their trucks rounded the bend, he saw it. A faint orange glow through the trees. They pulled up to the clearing and saw the old church standing like a skeleton. Roof half gone, windows boarded, bell tower leaning, and yet the smell of smoke was thick and heavy. Jacob jumped out first. "Let's check the nave," he shouted. The wooden doors groaned as he pushed them open. Inside, the darkness swallowed their flashlights whole. Not flames, not embers, but the air was hot, like something was burning just out of sight. And then they heard it. It was a voice, low, almost like a chant. "Anyone inside?" Jacob called. No answer. As they moved deeper, flashlights scanning the pews, the sound grew louder. A woman's voice now, echoing from up near the altar. Jacob's partner Dan whispered, "You hear that? It sounds like..." "I hear it." Jacob cut him off. "Let's go." When they approached the altar, that's when Jacob noticed something strange. The walls were covered in soot. Not random burns, but patterns. Circles, symbols, handprints. There were hundreds of them. Dan touched one of the blackened marks and he pulled his hand back fast. "It's hot." Before Jacob could respond, the singing stopped. Silence. And then the sound of a match strike. A single candle flickered to life on the altar. It shouldn't have been possible. There was no one there. But the flame burned, steady and bright. And behind it, they saw her. A figure standing just beyond the light. Face hidden by darkness, hands clasped like she was praying. Jacob stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you all right?" But the woman didn't move. She didn't speak. Just turned her head slowly toward them, and in a voice barely above a whisper, said,
They never stopped the fire.
Before Jacob could respond, the candle flared, a sudden flash of orange light. He stumbled back, shielding his eyes because he had just been flashbanged. When he looked again, she was gone, and the entire altar was covered in fresh soot. Handprints, scorch marks, all of them were still smoking. They cleared the building, certain that somebody must have been inside, a group of teenagers pranking them. But they didn't find anybody there. No footprints, and not even a heat signature left over. When they stepped outside, the glow that they had seen from the road was gone too. Just empty woods, completely silent. The next morning, Jacob went back with the fire inspector, and what they found still makes them shiver. Under the altar, in the ash and the rubble, was a circle of melted wax. Dozens of candle stubs, all of different ages, some fresh, some decades old, were gathered there. And carved into the floorboards were the words, "Light the flame, keep them here." Local legend says St. Mark's burned down in 1972 during a Halloween service gone wrong. A group of locals had been holding a seance, calling out to lost souls, when one of the candles tipped over. Everybody inside died in the blaze, but some folk, they believe the ritual worked. They called something, and every Halloween since, when storms roll in and the airs smell like smoke, the church lights up again. Jacob doesn't talk much about that night anymore. He says he still remembers the singing. The same slow, haunting melody, echoing through the dark. And every year, when Halloween storms hit, he swears he can smell the smoke from miles away. We never found the fire, he said. But I don't think it ever went out. Firefighters are trained to expect danger, collapsing floors, explosions, smoke. But when the flames clear and the figures they saw inside never existed, that kind of terror doesn't burn away easily. And as one police dispatcher found out, sometimes the haunting doesn't end when the line goes dead. Halloween night, 2015. Dispatch operator Kendra Lewis was working a late shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. She had been doing it for 8 years. By then, she had heard it all. Panicked parents, break-ins, false alarms, even the occasional prank call. But then, around 11:58 p.m., she got a call that didn't sound like any of those. It started with a click, then a child's voice, quiet, trembling.
Please, hurry, it's back.
Kendra straightened in her chair.
Okay, sweetheart, tell me your name, who's back?
But before she could get another word, a man's voice came on, low and breathless.
It's in the house.
Then the line went dead. Kendra logged the call, unknown number, faint static on the line, and immediately pinged the location. It came back to 1327 Hollow Creek Road. She forwarded the call to a patrol unit. 2 officers arrived within minutes, but when they got there, they found the dark place overgrown and boarded up. The front door was nailed shut, windows had been shattered, and the house had been abandoned for many years. They radioed back.
Dispatch, Hollow Creek is empty, no sign of anybody inside.
Kendra froze. That was impossible. The line was still active. She looked down at her screen. The call timer kept ticking. 2 minutes 34 seconds. 2 minutes 35 seconds. 2 minutes 36 seconds. Even though no one was on the line, the system still showed it as connected. She could hear faint static in her headset, and under it, something else. A whisper. It was too soft to make out. It was definitely there. She tried to trace it again, this time manually, but every time she did, the location pin jumped. 1 second it was Hollow Creek, the next a field 2 miles away, then the middle of a lake. All the dispatchers gathered around her. Nobody could figure it out. And then just as suddenly as it started, the line cut out. Disconnected. Kendra leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. Her supervisor told her it was probably a glitch, bad routing, maybe a signal bounce. But she knew what she heard. When she went to log the call in the system, the entry was gone. The call ID, the number, everything was erased. She called IT, and they checked the server logs. That number, the one that had shown up on her screen, hadn't been used since 1998. She looked it up later out of curiosity. The address matched the same one from the call, 1327 Hollow Creek Road. A family used to live there. A mother, a father, 2 children. They all died in a house fire on Halloween night in 1998. Kendra says she didn't sleep for days after that. She kept hearing that little voice in her head. "Please hurry, it's back." And she couldn't shake one last detail. After the officers cleared the scene, she kept her headset on just a moment longer. Right before the line went silent, she heard something else. A third voice, deep, rasping, and it whispered, "You're too late." Every Halloween since, Kendra's shift runs the same. She gets through the night just fine until the clock hits midnight. And then, just for a few seconds, she swears she can hear a child's voice again. "Please, hurry." She always checks the logs, and every year, there's a blank entry. No caller ID, no duration, just the same timestamp. 11:58 p.m. The dispatcher swore the voice on the phone was a woman begging for help from an address that burned down years ago. So when the radio crackled and an officer confirmed he was on the scene, everybody in the room went silent. What he saw next would make the most skeptical cop question what's really out there on Halloween night. Imagine pulling up to a house that looks abandoned at 3 a.m. The windows are blackened, the porch is caving in, the power has been shut off for years, gutters are falling off the building. But dispatch says somebody inside called 911. Elderly gentlemen claiming they're having chest pains. That's exactly what happened to one small town paramedic on Halloween night. What they thought was going to be a routine call was completely wrong. Because when they went in that house on Spruce Street, he met a woman who, according to every record they could find, had been dead for over 20 years. The paramedic we'll call Ryan got the call around 2:50 a.m. Elderly male, chest pain, 1406 Spruce Street. He looks at his partner. That address rings a bell. The locals call it the burn house. It had been boarded up for decades after a fire killed the old man who lived there alone because he threw his cigarettes away in the trash can that were still burning. Still, protocol's protocol, they roll up. Street is empty, no lights, no cars, no trick-or-treaters. The only thing breaking the silence was the crunching of their boots on the gravel road. Ryan shines his flashlight up to the house, peeling paint, shattered windows, faint smell of something old hangs in the air. He radios dispatch. "Dispatch, confirm. 1406 Spruce Street?" "Affirmative. Caller is identified as Elmer Matthews. He said he couldn't breathe." Ryan pauses. That's the guy that died in the fire. He grew up hearing this story. The front door creaks open on its own, and inside, the air is stale and cold, even though the night isn't. There's no power, yet somewhere upstairs, there's a faint glow. Ryan and his partner climb the stairs slowly. Flashlights cutting through the dark, each step groans under their weight. Now, at the top of the stairs, they find the bedroom door slightly open and a candle burning low on the floor. In the corner of the room, sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bed, is an elderly man. His skin looks sickly pale, almost gray in the candlelight, and his eyes are open, but glassy, like he's looking through them. Ryan steps closer. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. He reaches for the guy's wrist. It's cold. There's no pulse. He goes to call it in, but his radio cuts to static. His flashlight flickers, and then he hears a faint whisper. "Help me, please." He spins around, and no one's there. Just the sound of something dripping in the corner. Like water, but there's no water. It's melted wax from the candle. Ryan's partner bolts downstairs. When he finally has the courage to come back up, the guy's gone. The candle's still burning, but the bed is empty. They search the house top to bottom, every room, every corner. Nothing. When the police arrive, they assume it's a prank. EMS is tricking them somehow. Until Ryan shows them the body cam footage. The part where he checks the guy's vitals. The man is right there in the footage. But as soon as his partner re-enters the room, he fades away and the video cuts to static. No power to the property, no phone lines connected, but later that night the report comes in. Dispatch confirms the call did come from the house, from an old rotary number that hadn't been active since the early 90s. They even pull historic reports. Mr. Matthews died of smoke inhalation in a house fire on October 1st, 1992. At 3:07 a.m., the exact time Ryan and his crew got the call. To this day, Ryan says he still checks the call logs on Halloween night. Without fail, 1406 Spruce Street shows up. Same call, same name, same time. One of these years, he's going to go back and see if he can save him. Happy Halloween, everybody. As somebody who has grown up and researched the paranormal in Appalachia for almost my entire life, I just have such a special connection to this time of year. So here are a couple of the scariest stories I've come across that were handpicked by my wife. She helped me narrow down this list. So other than that, let's get into it. The car that wasn't there. This story takes place in 2003 in western North Carolina. The person telling it, we'll call her Lydia, worked doing taxes for a living. And every year, when the chaos of tax season finally ended, Lydia had a tradition. She'd disappear to the woods for a few days to get some peace and quiet. So on April 16th, the day after the season wrapped, Lydia grabbed her backpack, her hiking boots, and her new boyfriend, a man who years later would become her ex-husband, and they set out to one of her favorite spots, Mingus Mill, just outside of Cherokee, North Carolina. If you've never been, Mingus Mill is this old historic site with a working grist mill, surrounded by dense forest and crossed by a small, peaceful creek. There's a trail that winds back behind it. It's long, remote, and if you follow it far enough, you'll pass by a very old cemetery hidden deep in the trees. That morning was perfect. Clear skies, about 65 degrees, birds chirping, the kind of day that makes you forget about everything else. Lydia and her boyfriend hiked for hours, stopping at one point to eat a small picnic lunch along the trail. Then they packed up and kept going, past the cemetery and even farther into the quiet woods. By now, it was around 2 in the afternoon, and they hadn't seen another hiker in nearly an hour. The trail narrowed. Lydia was walking beside her boyfriend, talking casually as they went, when suddenly, they heard a car. Not approaching, not coming from somewhere in the distance. It was as if the car appeared out of thin air engine running maybe just a few yards away, and then it instantly shut off. The sound was so sudden and so real that both of them froze. Lydia's boyfriend whipped around, wide eyes. Did you hear that? She nodded, and they both stood there, completely still, listening. And that's where it gets stranger. They could feel the vibration of the engine through the ground. It wasn't faint, it was there. A deep, physical, unmistakable rumble. But there was nothing around them. No road, no pull-off, no people. They stayed there for 15 minutes, just talking it through. Could there have been a service road nearby? Maybe it was a ranger vehicle. But later, Lydia checked the maps, and there were no roads anywhere near that part of the trail. And even if there had been, they both agreed you'd still hear the car approach or fade away. This one didn't. It just existed for a few seconds, and then it didn't. This was in 2003, before smartphones, before anybody could just play a sound from their pocket. And besides, that wouldn't explain the ground shaking. There were no earthquakes recorded that day either. Lydia wanted to keep hiking, but her boyfriend was spooked. He said he thought maybe it was a bear growling, but Lydia shook her head. It hadn't sounded like an animal. It sounded mechanical. So, uneasily, they turned back around and hiked back to the parking lot. They never found an explanation, and Lydia has since gone over every map, every logical possibility, but nothing fits. Because that day, deep in the woods behind the mill, something started an engine that didn't exist. The Thing in the Holler. This story takes place out in the country, a small farm surrounded by thick woods and winding dirt roads. About a mile from the property, there's a cut through, a gravel road that crosses over a ridge and drops down into a small hollow. Locals just call it the Holler. And for as long as anybody can remember, people around there have said the same thing. The Holler is haunted. Now, most people just avoided it after dark. But one night, two brothers decided to test out that old story. They were bored, young, and full of bravado. One of them, we'll call him Danny, looked at his brother and said, "Let's walk across the holler tonight." It wasn't meant to be brave, it was a dare. So just after dark, they grabbed their big spotlights, the kind they normally use for raccoon hunting, and they headed down the road toward the ridge. At first, it felt like any other night. Crickets, the crunch of gravel under their boots, a soft wind through the trees. But as soon as they reached the mouth of the holler, everything changed. The air felt heavy. The forest got quiet. Danny later said it was like walking into a room where somebody had just been arguing. That weird electric tension hangs in the air. Still, they kept walking. The gravel road wound around the ridge, pitch black on both sides. Every few steps, they'd sweep their spotlight back and forth just to make sure they weren't being watched. And that's when they heard it. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was walking behind them. It sounded maybe 10 or 15 paces back. They froze. The footsteps kept going, 1, 2, 3 more steps, and then they stopped. They turned around and looked. There's nothing. They aimed their lights up and down the road, and they couldn't see anything besides gravel and trees. They started walking again, and sure enough, crunch, crunch, crunch. The steps matched their pace perfectly. When they stopped, it stopped. When they sped up, it sped up. And every time it was just a split second behind, close enough to feel like someone was right there with them in the dark. By now, the brothers were terrified. They stopped talking, just the sound of their boots and the invisible thing pacing behind them. They made it almost all the way through the holler before one of them finally broke. They took off sprinting until their lungs burned, not daring to look back. When they finally reached the far edge, they didn't turn around. They didn't go back through that ridge. Instead, they walked an extra 6 miles down back roads just to get home. Because whatever the hell was in that holler, they wanted no part of it. To this day, Danny says it was the most scared he's ever been. Our last little Appalachian snapshot of the night is the cabin, the tunnel, and the thing in between. This story takes place in Appalachian, Virginia, on a piece of land that, if you believe the locals, has never been quite right. So, growing up, this girl, we'll call her Emily, used to visit her granny, who lived completely off the grid. No cable, no internet, just a little cabin sitting on 7 acres of mountain land, which that sounds like the dream. Thick woods on one side, steep ridges on the other, the kind of place where if you stood naked in your driveway, your neighbors wouldn't see you. After Granny passed away when Emily was in high school, her family moved into the cabin. Now, Emily never found the place creepy. She actually liked it. But everyone else, her friends hated being there. And once you hear what happened, you'll understand why. Before she passed, Granny had been digging around the hillside beside the cabin. And one day, she found something strange. A very old glass liquor bottle buried in the dirt. And next to it was a very long bone. Well, Granny kept it. She never figured out what it was. But Emily said since then, the property just had this heaviness to it. The cabin itself was weird too. The main room had 2 glass walls, so no matter where you stood, you could see straight out into the trees. And everyone who ever spent time there said the same thing. It felt like someone was watching you. One night, Emily invited her 3 friends over for a sleepover, and they were terrified of the cabin, but they came anyway. After everybody went to bed, Emily passed out first. Her parents were asleep in the back room. Her friends, though, wide awake, were whispering. They were too scared to close their eyes. And that's when they heard it. A coin dropped onto the floor somewhere down the hall. It hit once with a ping, and then it rolled. It rolled all the way down the hallway. They froze, waiting to hear footsteps or a door creak, but nothing ever came. Everyone in the house was asleep. The next morning, though, there was no coin on the floor. About a quarter mile up the road from the cabin's driveway, there was a tunnel that ran under an old stretch of highway. Locals said back in the 1990s, bored teenagers used to go down there and sacrifice animals. That place had a reputation, and everyone said it was demonic. Emily thought it was an urban legend, until she found out what was really waiting there. One night, Emily and 2 of those same friends were driving home. They came up on the tunnel, the same one everybody said was cursed, and it was dark, foggy. The headlights were bouncing off the wet concrete. As they came around the curve, something darted into the road. Emily slammed on the brakes, and for a half second, the thing was caught in the beams of her headlights, and she said it was fleshy, twisted, bigger than a raccoon, but smaller than a person. Before she could even react, it was gone. She didn't look back, but her friend in the passenger seat did. And whatever they saw back there, they wouldn't talk about it. After that night, Emily refused to drive under that tunnel after dark. A few months later, she was driving alone, broad daylight, coming up on the same tunnel. As she started into the curve, her radio cut out. At first, she thought it was a lost signal, but then through the static came this garbled, distorted voice. It was the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse theme. Only it wasn't cheerful. It was warped and wrong, echoing in and out like something was dragging the sound through water. She said the hair on her body stood up. And just as soon as she cleared the far side of the tunnel, the song stopped. The radio came back normally, and it never happened again. To this day, Emily says she doesn't know what's going on out there at the cabin, or in the woods, or under that tunnel. But whatever it is, it's old, it's watching, and it's still there. These are 5 allegedly true Wendigo encounters told by the people who lived through them. In the winter of 1994, a retired forest ranger living alone in the woods of northern Minnesota started noticing something strange around his property. At first, he thought it was just the snow playing tricks on him. But by the end of the week, he became convinced that something, or someone, had been coming right up to his window while he slept. And the strangest part? Whatever it wasn't leaving tracks like anything he'd ever seen before. This story takes place just outside of Ely, Minnesota, basically as far north as you can get without hitting Canada. Our main guy, Dale, was a retired forest ranger. He was a tough guy, practical, not the type of guy to believe in ghost stories or folklore. He spent most of his life in those woods, patrolling the trails, tracking bears, and helping lost hikers get back to civilization. So when he retired, he decided to build a small cabin on a piece of land he always loved. It was quiet, isolated, and surrounded by pine trees and frozen lakes. He had a dog, a German Shepherd named Boone, and that was all he needed. He liked the peace and quiet. But one night, in late January, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. when Dale woke up to Boone whining at the front door. Not barking, whining and shivering like he was scared. Dale sat up in bed and listened for a second. Then he grabbed a flashlight and a coat. When he opened the door, the first thing he noticed was the snow. It had dumped a few inches overnight that was completely fresh and untouched, except for the tracks. About 20 feet from his porch was a single line of footprints leading out of the woods. But they weren't boot tracks. They were bare feet. Long, thin, human-shaped footprints that sunk deep into the snow, like whatever made them weighed a lot. And they led right up to his cabin. He followed them with the beam of his flashlight, and then his stomach dropped. The tracks circled his cabin, once, then again, and then they disappeared back into the tree line. Now, Dale had dealt with weird stuff before. Mountain lions, drunk hunters, even one guy he found wandering in a snowstorm half delirious. But this, it didn't make sense to him. He tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a lost hiker. But somebody out here barefoot in negative 15-degree weather? That wasn't possible. Boone refused to go outside the next morning. He sat by the door, staring out toward the woods, his ears pinned back, growling at nothing. A few nights later, it happened again. Dale was asleep when something tapped on the side of his cabin. Just once, then again, then again. He sat up, heart pounding, listening, and then he only heard silence. He got up, grabbed his flashlight again, and he stepped outside. The cold hit him instantly, but there was no wind, no movement, just quiet snow falling through the beam of his light. He swept the light across the cabin wall, and that's when he saw it. Right below his bedroom window, maybe 5 feet off the ground, were long, vertical scratches, deep grooves torn into the wood, not from claws and not from a bear. It looked like it came from fingernails. Dale didn't sleep the rest of the night. He locked the door, loaded his rifle, and sat in his chair until morning. When the sun came up, he walked back outside again to look. The footprints were back, the same pattern, same shape, leading right up to the window, stopping below the claw marks, and then walking back into the woods. But this time, the prints were smaller, as if whatever had been there was shrinking. Dale later told his neighbors he stopped snowshoeing alone after that. When they asked why, he said,
"Because I finally saw something out there that wasn't supposed to exist."
He didn't say the word Wendigo, but everybody that lived around him knew exactly what he meant. So what did Dale see that winter? Was it a prank? A starving wanderer? Or something older? Something the local natives warned about long before cabins were ever built in those woods. All Dale ever said was this:
"The forest takes care of its own, but sometimes it comes looking for company."
In 2008, a truck driver heading south from Ontario toward International Falls saw something on the highway he's never forgotten. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't an animal, but whatever it was, it watched him. And after that night, he refused to drive that stretch of road again, especially after finding out that 2 other people saw, or at least heard, the exact same thing. So this story takes place on Highway 11, which runs right alongside the Ontario-Minnesota border. It's a lonely stretch. Endless pine forest, old mining towns, and long empty miles with nothing but static on the radio. Our main guy here, he was a long-haul trucker named Mike. He'd been driving this route for years, hauling lumber, sometimes produce, just really nothing out of the ordinary. And on this night, early December, the weather was bad. Not snowing, but foggy with this weird haze that headlights could barely cut through. He was used to deer crossing the road out here, even sometimes moose, so when he saw a shape up ahead that was standing right in his lane, he slowed down. But when he got closer, he realized it wasn't an animal. Mike said it looked like a person at first. Tall, maybe 7 feet, standing completely still. Its skin was pale, not white, but gray, like wet cement. It was so thin that he could see the outline of its ribs in the glow of his headlights. And its arms, they were long, hanging down to its knees, ending in hands that looked a little too big for its body. Mike thought maybe it was a hitchhiker or someone in trouble, so he slowed down to stop, but then the figure turned its head. Not fast or jerky, just slowly, like it was aware of him the entire time, like a predator. And when it looked directly at his truck, he saw the eyes. They didn't glow and they didn't reflect red like an animal's. They were just solid black. Mike hit the gas. The figure didn't move, it just stood there turning its head to follow him as he drove past. He looked in his side mirror and he saw it take one long step toward the shoulder, and then it was gone. Just gone, like it stepped backward into the fog and vanished. By the time he reached the next truck stop, a little diner outside of International Falls, he was shaking. When he walked in, 2 other drivers were sitting at the counter. One of them looked at him and jokingly said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." Mike laughed it off and said, "Something was standing back there in the road." The other driver went pale. He said, Was it tall? Gray looking? Mike nodded. The man said quietly, "Yep. I heard it screaming about an hour ago." Turns out, that second driver had pulled off near Rainy Lake earlier that night. He said he was checking his trailer when he heard a noise from the tree line. Something high-pitched and human-like, but not quite human. He said it was the most unnatural sound he ever heard, like a person screaming underwater. And as soon as he heard it, his radio cut the static. Both men agreed it didn't sound like a coyote or a moose, and the waitress, who'd been listening quietly, finally said, "You're not the first ones to talk about that thing." She said locals had been reporting weird sightings along Highway 11 for years. A pale figure walking the road at night, sometimes screaming in the fog. Most folk called it the Screamer, but among the Ojibwe people in the area, it had another name: Wendigo. Mike didn't finish his meal. He called dispatch and said he'd be rerouting south through Duluth from then on, and he never drove Highway 11 again. And to this day, truckers who take that route still talk about the strange things in the fog. Bare footprints appearing on the asphalt. Radios going silent for no reason. And that sound, the one that's not quite a scream, and not quite a human voice. In the summer of 1977, a family camping in Michigan's Upper Peninsula woke up to a smell so strong and so unnatural that it made every hair on their bodies stand up. They thought it was a dead animal at first, but they were wrong. By the time the sun came up, something had been walking around their tent all night. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. So this story takes place right along Lake Superior. Back then, it was, and still is, one of those postcard-perfect places to camp. Tall pines, clean lakes, hiking trails that feel like they go on forever. The family was the Brenners, husband, wife, and 2 kids, ages 8 and 11. They had an old station wagon, a canvas tent, Coleman lanterns, the whole 1970s family camping vibe. They had been camping there for a few summers now, so they knew the area well. But on this trip, something felt off, almost as soon as they arrived. The ranger who checked them in mentioned that a few deer carcasses had been found near the lake. "Likely wolves," he said, but there was something in his tone, like he didn't fully believe himself. The first night went fine, but the second, around midnight, the father Bill woke up to this awful smell. He said it hit him like a wall. It wasn't just bad, it was wrong. It smelled like rotting meat and wet fur with this sour, almost chemical edge, like decay mixed with metal. He sat up thinking maybe an animal died nearby, but then he realized the smell was moving. It was faint at first and then strong again, like something was circling the tent. And then he heard it. Heavy, slow footsteps crunching in the dirt just outside. One step, pause, another step, and then a low, wet breathing sound. Bill grabbed his flashlight and he whispered for his wife to stay quiet. He unzipped the tent slowly, shined the beam toward the sound, and caught sight of something retreating behind the trees. He said it was tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, hunched over with patchy fur across its back. And the way it moved, it wasn't like a bear or a man. It was almost insect-like, fast but unsteady, like it wasn't used to walking on 2 legs. The smell was overwhelming, and he said that made him gag. Then, silence. The sounds of nature returned, and whatever it was gone. At dawn, Bill checked around the campsite. Their cooler was tipped over, ice packs and food still inside untouched, but near the tree line, he found drag marks in the dirt leading toward the lake. Deep grooves in the soil, like something had been pulling a heavy body. He followed the marks for maybe 30 feet when he saw what was at the end. A deer carcass, split wide open down the middle. No claw marks, no bite marks, just ripped open. He turned back to camp, loaded up his car, and told his wife they were leaving immediately. When they reached the ranger station, the same ranger came out. He took one look at Bill's face and said, "You smelled it, didn't you?" And Bill nodded. The ranger sighed and said quietly, "When you smell that, that means it's time to pack up." The Brenners never went back to that campsite. Years later, Bill told his son, who's now an adult, that he didn't think it was a bear or even a person. He said, "It moved like it was starving, but it didn't eat what it killed. It was just angry." Locals around Lake Superior still talk about that smell, that combination of rot, fur, and metal that sometimes drifts through the woods right before winter hits. Hunters say it's a dead buck. Old-timers say it's something else, something that walks the tree line when food runs out. Something that's never full. In 1983, two college friends went snowmobiling in the woods of North Dakota, and only one of them came back. When rescuers finally found the missing man's snowmobile, the engine was still running. There were no footprints, no blood, and no signs of struggle. Just a single set of barefoot tracks in the snow that stopped halfway across a frozen field, like something had lifted him straight off the ground. So this story takes place near Turtle Mountain in North Dakota, a quiet stretch of forest and farmland near the Canadian border. Back then, it was a favorite spot for snowmobilers, wide open fields, dense forest, and trails that could take you for miles. The two guys in this story were students, Evan and Mark. They were both outdoorsy. Both grew up riding sleds since they were kids. That winter, the snow was deep and powdery, the perfect conditions. And on a Saturday in early February, they decided to take a long ride into the woods before another storm rolled in for the night. They packed extra fuel, a thermos of coffee, and planned to be back before dark. But by midnight, only one of them, Evan, had returned. According to Evan, they had been riding for hours when the snow started coming down heavier. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. They stopped at a clearing to get their bearings, but the wind was howling so loud they couldn't hear each other even a few feet apart. So Mark motioned that he was going to go circle around the ridge and meet back at the tree line. That was the last time Evan ever saw him. 10 minutes later, Evan realized he couldn't even see Mark's headlights anymore. So he waited, calling his name, but nothing. Then over the wind, he heard it. A faint voice calling his name. "Evan, come here." He said it was Mark's voice, but it wasn't coming from behind him. It was coming from ahead, deep in the snowstorm. Evan turned his sled toward the sound and started following it. Every few seconds he'd hear it again, always just far enough away he couldn't see who was calling. He followed it for almost half an hour before he realized something was wrong. The voice wasn't getting any closer. It was leading him somewhere. And then just as suddenly as it started, the voice stopped. Evan shut off his engine and listened. All he could hear was the wind and something else. A faint crunching sound, like footsteps circling him in the snow. He panicked and started the sled back up, and then he gunned it all the way home. When he got there, he expected to see Mark waiting, but the cabin was dark, and Mark never came back. The next morning, search and rescue teams went out, and they found Mark's snowmobile 5 miles from the ridge. Upright, engine still idling, and half buried in the snow. There were no tracks around it except for one set of bare footprints. They led away from the sled, out across an open field for maybe 100 yards, and then they just stopped. No drag marks, no sign of a fall, just ended in the middle of nowhere. The rescuers searched for 3 days before a blizzard forced them to call it off. Mark was never found. Evan wouldn't talk about what happened for years, and when he finally did, he said the thing that scared him most wasn't losing his friend. It was the voice. He said, it sounded exactly like him. The same tone, the same laugh, but it was too perfect. Like something trying to sound human. Locals around Turtle Mountain still talk about the Wendigo, a spirit that mimics the voices of people, leading you deeper into the cold until you're lost forever. And every winter, when the wind howls through the trees, some snowmobilers swear they can still hear it. Someone calling their name out in the white. In 1961, a small logging crew deep in the Wisconsin woods started finding animal carcasses hanging from trees. At first, they thought it was the work of poachers, or maybe a bear, but when they decided to stay up one night to catch whatever was doing it, they realized they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. So this story takes place in northern Wisconsin in a giant national forest, and a massive stretch of dense pine trees and birch trees that run for miles with almost no sign of civilization. The logging crew was small, 5 men total, working a temporary contract to clear out a section of timber near the Bad River. These were tough, no-nonsense guys, and most of them were veterans, used to sleeping rough and working in total isolation. Their camp was about 10 miles off the nearest service road. A few tents, a tool shack, and a fire pit was all they had. For the first week, everything was normal. They worked, they drank, they slept, but on the morning of the 8th day, they found something strange. One of the younger guys, a 20-year-old named Jack, was walking the edge of the tree line when he spotted it. A deer carcass hanging about 10 feet off the ground, split wide open from chest to stomach. There were no bullet holes or anything. It was just hanging there like somebody had carefully hooked it in the tree. He radioed it in, assuming it was poachers, but later that day, the crew found another, and then a third. Each one was hung in the same way, perfectly centered between 2 trees, like somebody was making a point. By sunset, everybody on the crew was on edge. That night, the foreman, Ray, told his crew that they were staying up in shifts, just in case whoever was doing this came back. They built the largest fire they could manage, cleaned their rifles, and waited. Around midnight, the woods went completely silent. There was no wind, no crickets, just this heavy, unnatural quiet that felt wrong. Then somewhere, out in the darkness, they heard it. a low, rattling scream that echoed through the trees. It wasn't an animal sound, and it wasn't human. It was deep and wet and stretched out like somebody was exhaling their last breath forever. One of the men shouted, "Who's out there?" But there was no answer. Then twigs started snapping around them. Ray aimed his flashlight toward the sound, and what the beam caught froze every man in place. Standing between the trees was something tall, easily 8, maybe 9 feet tall, and its skin looked stretched too tight over its bones, like it had been starved for years. Its eyes caught the light, glowing faintly like glass marbles, and was holding something, a piece of meat maybe, dripping into the snow. Ray lifted his rifle. The creature didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, slow, curious, and then took a step forward. The smell hit him next. Rotten iron, like spoiled blood. Then Ray fired. The gunshot echoed through the trees, but the figure didn't fall. It didn't even move. It just stepped backward and disappeared into the dark. At dawn, the crew had packed up everything. They drove the trucks out to the road and didn't stop till they hit town. When they reported it to the ranger, he told them he'd look into it. But when Ray mentioned the smell, the exact same one described by hunters and campers for generations, the ranger just nodded and said, "You did the right thing by leaving." The entire logging site was abandoned. A few months later, a new crew went up to finish the job, but they only lasted 2 days. They claimed they heard something screaming at night just beyond the tree line. When asked to describe it, one of them said it sounded like something human that forgot how to be. To this day, that forest in northern Wisconsin is home to dozens of Wendigo sightings, but none quite like that one. The forest has grown back now, swallowing what's left of the old logging road. And some nights, if you stand out there long enough, you can still hear the echo of an axe hitting wood, followed by a voice in the dark calling for help. Except according to locals, the last people who work there haven't been alive for a very long time. What if the internet isn't just full of cute cat videos, but also stories so terrifying they latch onto your mind and refuse to let go, even years later? I remember going into my mom's classroom after a long day in middle school and reading as many stories as possible from the Creepypasta wiki. Some of these stories aren't just urban legends, but they're true nightmare fuel that still haunts our collective consciousness. Are you brave enough to revisit them with me this Halloween season? Let's get into it. The first story I remember clear as day is The Smiling Man by Blue Tidal. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near the police-patrolled park quite a ways away from my apartment. It was quiet, even for the weekend, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street to loop back to my apartment. That's when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz. but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, and headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. But the closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were wide and wild, his head tilted back slightly, looking at the sky. His mouth, it was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street, and as I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide stretched across his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street ahead was completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he'd been standing to find him gone. He disappeared. For the briefest of moments, I was relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took a giant, exaggerated, tiptoed step toward me, as if he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quick. I'd like to say at this point, I ran away and I pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all that would have helped me, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, and the smiling man crept toward me. He stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling, still looking at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless, whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling. Then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of my sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see a stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in the city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that was a very scary thing. to see. The next story that I look back very fondly on is Lavender Town Syndrome. This is one of the reasons why I begged my mom to get me a Game Boy or a DSi. I can't remember what one was out at the time but I really wanted to play Pokemon. In fact, one of my first jobs was at a video game store. So because of Lavender Town Syndrome, I got Pokemon Red and Green because of it on an original Game Boy, just to see what the hype was about. Lavender Town Syndrome. The Lavender Town Syndrome, also known as the Lavender Town Tone or the Lavender Town Suicides, was a peak in suicides and illnesses in children between the ages of 7 to 12 in Japan, back in February 1996. The phenomenon occurred shortly after the release of the first Pokemon games, Pokemon Red and Green. Rumors say these suicides and illnesses only occurred after children playing the game reached Lavender Town. The location's theme music had extremely high frequencies that studies have shown only children and young teens can hear because their ears are far more sensitive. Due to this effect, at least 200 children supposedly committed suicide, and many more developed conditions and afflictions. The children who killed themselves usually did so by hanging or jumping from heights. Those who did not often acted irrationally and complained of severe headaches after listening to the theme. This mass hysteria was caused by the first release version of the game. After the incidents, the programmers fixed the location's music to be at a lower frequency. Lavender Town now sounds different depending on which Pokemon you're playing, but since that change, no children are affected by the song. One video appeared in 2010 using special software to analyze the audio waves of Lavender Town's music. When played, the software created images of the unknown near the end of the audio. This created controversy since the unknown didn't appear in the series until Generation 2 games, Silver, Gold, and Crystal. The arrangement of the unknown appears to translate to "Leave now." That was a little short, fun one, and probably my favorite creepypasta I read. And I remember I'm in my mom's classroom. She had a tiny little computer station in the corner with 4 computers. I'm sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights in a, very tan beige room. There's red chairs all around me, and typically there'd be no kids in there because she would do after school, right? She'd be tutoring students in a different room. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading all these things. Well, the lights are on a timer. And the next story, the lights went out in the middle of it. And I was I was locked into the story, but 2, I was afraid if I got up, I would see something from this story. So I was terrified. I literally sat there in fear until my mom came back to her classroom. So just put yourself in that mindset and enjoy Abandoned by Disney by Slime Beast. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real-life ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town, though. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place, and then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, which were too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and they even blamed the cast and workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends, because it wasn't the sand, and it wasn't because of foreigners are lazy, but both were convenient excuses. Now, I sincerely doubt these reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beach side of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large palace in the middle of it. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past, or the first semi-live action movie they came out with recently. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes and then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grab by the government was supposedly for a fictional highway project. Knowing full and well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Corporation actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everybody on how lucrative the project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art of this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everybody flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also in a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern US. It was a questionable mix at this point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anybody could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connections between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Islands, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities were flooded with tourists and traffic, and then it all stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to the large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from somebody who had explored the Treasure Island resort and posted a whole blog about the crazy stuff he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who'd lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around had a hand in wrecking that place. People there felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks did about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock in the local waters when they closed, including live sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there's anything I can take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort. Or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had said one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their own embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results. Basically, for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I received back in the mail in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World. And I guess I had been there in the late 80s, so that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it, it just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood, and I only remembered it munched into my research. Even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants that had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried hard to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous monolithic wooden gates, whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black.
Abandoned by Disney.
Clearly the handwork of some past local or an employee that wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not to drive through, so I grabbed my digital camera, the map, and I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entry. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse. This was the sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxiously tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotten wood and various charged bits of unidentified material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by the weather. The most interesting thing on the ground was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring at empty space with a silly toothy grin as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they were taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the doors, or the gaping maw where the doors would have been, someone had once again painted,
Abandoned by Disney.
I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw in the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. Inside of the building was so stark and bare that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, computers, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified every step like a slow rat-tat-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem interesting. The kitchen was, as you would imagine it, an industrial-grade food prep area with all the appliances and space. No expense spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door was knocked off its hinges, every metal surface was kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. A huge freezer, not remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in random directions, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island resort, somebody had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking water on the floor, so I didn't stay long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped and leaked or just ran freely. It seemed weird to me that they should have shut off the water long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally, I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything in there. I thought there was actually a television or a radio in one room, as I think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like.
I don't believe it. I don't know what they said next. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you.
Then another replied that I couldn't understand, possibly weeping. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who would hold up there and would probably knife me. At the front door of the palace, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my troubles, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on the pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start settling, so the light fell into the object in the perfect way for the photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and I snapped another. I moved closer to get the details of its face. Slowly and casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly in my eyes, turned and slithered off the pedestal across the grass into the trees. All 80 feet of it, headlong, disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the ground. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and now I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head after that. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself onto a desk with questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, except for the dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the
"Abandoned by Disney"
motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep it at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended with a metal door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." That perked up my spirit a bit for two reasons. One, a mascot-only area would have definitely been interesting back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. No vandals, looters, nobody in the lobby. This was the only place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or to steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, it's abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate off the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something nobody else had apparently thought of or been able to do at the time. The mascot's only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their tolls. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a punch in and out clock on the wall complete with filled out time cards. Chairs were scattered around there, and even a small break room with an old static filled television and long rotted out food and drink was left on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything's left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement of the old mascots area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers were scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson-covered floor. Everything was just sort of squishy. Any wood disintegrated in the mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One of the things that annoyed me the most was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the palace. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled onto it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started walking away. Then there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked slowly open. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flashlight to look for a light source on the wall, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a large electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light would just keep getting brighter and brighter until the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that crucial stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. And unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white, and white where he should be black, and his normal red overalls were light blue. The sign was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging from the wall, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show the entire row of frozen putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. I was going to place one of the character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hand. As I looked into the face of a wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump up with fright. I looked down at my feet, and between my shoes was a human skull that had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back at the skull at the floor. I had to take pictures of it, I had to. For any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you didn't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had doubt in my mind right from the start that even if it was gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photo negative, opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. Imagine first sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood in the center of the room, its fake face staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no," over and over again. With shaking hands and a violent thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. My digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of a Mickey costume. As the camera moved to my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey costume.
"Hey!"
It said in a hush, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice.
"Want to see my head come off?"
And it started to pull at its own head, working clumsily, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements, similar to a wounded man tried to pull himself free of a predator's jaw. It worked its digits into its neck. So much blood. So much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard the sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the door out of this room, I saw a final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails.
Abandoned by God.
I never got the pictures out of my camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from the palace, I fled for my sanity, if not my very life. I knew why Disney didn't want anybody to know about this place. They didn't want anybody like me getting in, and they didn't want anything like that getting out. Hey everybody, tonight we're going to have some pretty weird facts. We're going to be starting with some surface level weird history, and then it's just going to get stranger and stranger as the video goes on. If you've ever read one of the Uncle John's bathroom readers, this is essentially something similar. It's a collection of strange facts, but in video format. So if you enjoyed that, hopefully you enjoy this. Before you get comfortable, if you're using this to go to sleep, make sure you like, subscribe, and let me know where in the world you're viewing from, especially if you enjoy this type of content. Let's get into it. In 1518, a dancing plague struck Strasbourg. Hundreds of people danced uncontrollably for days. Some reportedly danced themselves to death. President Jimmy Carter filed a UFO sighting report in 1973. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramid in Giza. In 1835, the New York Sun published a hoax claiming life had been discovered on the moon, including that the moon contained moon bats. The shortest war in history was between Britain and Zanzibar on August 27, 1896. It lasted a whole 38 minutes. The Eiffel Tower can grow over 6 inches taller on hot days due to metal expansion. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus once invited dinner guests over and gave them either food or a live animal in gift boxes, at random. Tusomu Yamaguchi survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings. In 1952, London's Great Smog was so bad it stopped city buses and blinded people mid-walk. The US government once tried to weaponize bats with bombs in World War II. It did not go well. Octopuses have 3 hearts and blue blood. A group of flamingos is called a flamboyance. Frogs can freeze solid and thaw back to life. Sea otters hold hands while sleeping so they don't float away from each other. Crows have best friends and get stressed when they're separated. Axolotls can regrow limbs and even parts of their brain. Male seahorses get pregnant and give birth. There's a species of jellyfish that can revert back to its juvenile state, making it biologically immortal. The fingerprints of koalas are so close to humans that they can taint crime scenes. Goats have rectangular pupils, giving them panoramic vision. Bananas are radioactive due to their potassium content. You technically shed your entire outer layer of skin every 28 days. There's a species of mushroom in Oregon that is the largest living organism on Earth. It covers 2,000 acres. The average human body carries more bacterial cells than human cells. 1 teaspoon of a neutron star weighs about 6 billion tons. The word robot comes from a Czech word meaning forced labor. Light from the sun takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach Earth. Sound travels over 4 times faster in water than in air. Your stomach gets a new lining every 3 to 4 days so it doesn't digest itself. Honey never spoils. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs, and it's still edible. Mr. Rogers was colorblind. He couldn't see red or green very well. The voice of Yoda, Frank Oz, also voices Miss Piggy. Charlie Chaplin, the film actor, once entered a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest and lost. The actor who played Uncle Phil on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air voiced Shredder on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. The theme song to Friends was written in just 1 hour. In Japan, Godzilla is an official citizen. Film director Alfred Hitchcock didn't have a belly button. It was sewn shut after a surgery. The first product to have a barcode was Wrigley's Gum. In 1997, Taco Bell had joked that it bought the Liberty Bell and renamed it the Taco Liberty Bell. This was an April Fool's joke that people got offended by. The original name of Pac-Man was Puck-Man, but they changed it to prevent vandalism on their machines. Ketchup was once sold as a medicine in the 1830s. Peanuts aren't nuts, they're legumes. Spam, the meat, is short for spiced ham. Apples float in water because they're 25% air. The popsicle was invented by an 11-year-old boy, by accident. The world's most stolen food is cheese. The 57 on the Heinz 57 bottles doesn't really mean anything. It was a random number the founder liked. Cotton candy, or candy floss, was invented by a dentist. The hole in donuts was originally designed to help them cook more evenly. McDonald's once made bubblegum flavored broccoli to get kids to eat veggies. It did not go very well. The inventor of Vaseline ate a spoonful of it every day. The hashtag symbol is actually called an octothorpe. Before erasers, people used bread to erase pencil markings. In South Korea, it's common to have booking clubs, where waiters drag you to tables to meet strangers. You can't hum while holding your nose closed. If you just tried to hum, you look stupid. A day on Venus is longer than its year. In Switzerland, it's illegal to own just one guinea pig because they get lonely. A bolt of lightning contains enough energy to toast 100,000 slices of bread. Pigeons can tell the difference between Picasso and Monet. Some cats are allergic to humans. Your brain uses about 20% of your body's energy, even though it's only 2% of your weight. You can't tickle yourself because your brain anticipates the sensation. The brain can store the equivalent of 2.5 petabytes. That's around 3 million hours of TV shows. Every time you remember something, your brain rewrites that memory slightly. People are more creative in the shower because dopamine levels rise during routine tasks. Your brain is more active at night than during the day. Deja vu happens when your brain skips a beat and mistakes short-term memories for long-term memories. Human brains are sometimes more similar to dolphin brains than chimpanzees. Memories aren't stored in just one place, they're scattered across the brain. Reading out loud helps with memory retention more than silent reading. In Victorian England, people took mourning photos of the recently deceased posed as if they were alive. The Winchester Mystery House has a staircase that leads to nowhere and doors that open into walls. Some moths drink the tears of sleeping birds. The Dolotoff Pass incident involved 9 hikers found dead under bizarre, still unexplained conditions. There's a lake in Tanzania that turns animals into stone, Lake Natron, due to its high alkalinity. In 1971, a man hijacked a plane, parachuted out with $2,000, and was never found. We know him today as D.B. Cooper. The Bloody Mary game likely stems from a real 16th century queen. Some people have a condition called exploding head syndrome. It sounds worse than it is, involving loud noises in the head while falling asleep. Human decomposition starts within minutes of death at the cellular level. Shadow people are a common visual hallucination during sleep paralysis. A Swedish couple tried to name their child BRFXXCCXMNPCCCLLMMPRXVCLMNCKSSQLBB111116. Pronounced Albin. The Swedish government said no. The inventor of the Super Soaker was a NASA engineer. A man once tried to rob a bank using a lemon as invisible ink on his face. He thought it would make him invisible to the cameras. Cow moos have regional accents. The national animal of Scotland is the unicorn. Google was originally called Backrub. In 2006, a Coca-Cola employee tried to sell company secrets to Pepsi. Pepsi turned him in. The dot on the I is called a tittle, but the tail on the Q is called a Q. There's a sport in Finland called wife carrying. The prize? The wife's weight in beer. Some turtles can breathe through their butts. The smell of freshly cut grass is actually a plant's distress call. The moon smells like spent gunpowder, according to Apollo astronauts. Earth is the only planet not named after a god. Butterflies can taste with their feet. A baby puffin is called a puffling. There's a cloud in space that smells like rum and contains enough alcohol to fill 400 trillion pints. Wombats dig burrows with their backsides to protect against predators. Sharks are older than trees. A single human body decomposing in a house can release over 400 different chemicals, enough to sometimes confuse for a meth lab. In 2007, a woman in Tokyo lived in a man's closet for a year without him knowing. He discovered her when his milk kept vanishing. Ghost marriages still tend to happen in parts of China, where dead people are symbolically married to each other to satisfy family spirits. The WOW signal, a 72-second burst of radio from deep space recorded in 1977, has never been explained. The Dybbuk box, said to be haunted, was sold on eBay with a warning. Multiple owners reported hallucinations, nightmares, and illness. Even Post Malone claimed to have been cursed by it. In ancient Rome, people feared being buried alive so much they'd sometimes bury their dead with a string tied to a bell above the ground. Forensic scientists discovered that dead bodies can still move. As muscles and ligaments contract, limbs may twitch and shift for months. Cotard's delusion is a real condition where people believe they are dead, rotting, or no longer exist. There's a condition called autobrewery syndrome where the body can turn carbs into alcohol. Patients get drunk without drinking. After decapitation, the brain can remain conscious for about 15 seconds. Some reports even claim eyes blink and mouths move. There have been recorded cases of people undergoing surgery while fully conscious, but unable to move or scream due to anesthesia awareness. Human teeth are as strong as shark teeth, only our jaws aren't as terrifying. Doctors have removed entire plants growing inside of people, including a fir tree discovered growing in a man's lungs. Your body replaces every cell about every 7 to 10 years, meaning you are physically not the same person you were a decade ago. Some corpses, called corpse candles, can spontaneously ignite due to the buildup of gases and fats. This may be the basis of spontaneous human combustion legends. Your stomach growls louder when nervous due to increased digestive activity. Ancient people believed it meant a spirit was trying to speak. The average human sheds around 30,000 skin cells every minute. Most of the dust in your house is made of you. The Bell Witch haunting in Tennessee from 1817 to 1821 reportedly tormented an entire family with voices, beatings, and prophecies, and President Andrew Jackson supposedly investigated himself. The Japanese urban legend of the Kuchisake Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman, describes a woman in a surgical mask who asks if you think she's pretty, then slices your face to match hers if you answer wrong. In some parts of Appalachia, witch balls made of hair, twigs, and herbs were placed under floorboards to trap evil spirits. Some European cathedrals have hidden hellmouths, terrifying carved gateways symbolizing entrances to hell, complete with demons and tormented souls. The word abracadabra was originally used as a magical healing spell in ancient Rome, worn on amulets to ward off disease. In Iceland, there's a large portion of the population that still believe in elves, or huldufólk, and people have diverted roads to avoid disrupting their supposed dwellings. Some versions of the Ouija board were once marketed as wedding gifts or date night games. Spirit communication was seen as wholesome bonding at the time. During the Salem witch trials, one of the accused witches was pressed to death with stones. His last words were "more weight." In voodoo belief, zombies aren't horror fiction. They're created by sorcerers using herbs and poison to create a state of living dead. In parts of Indonesia, families keep their mummified dead in their homes for years, dressing them, feeding them, and talking to them. In 2016, archaeologists in Sicily found a vampire burial, a child with a stone wedged in its mouth to prevent it from rising from the dead. Sky burials in Tibet involve laying bodies on mountaintops for vultures to consume, a symbolic return to nature. Victorians were obsessed with death. They often took mourning hair jewelry made from strands of dead loved ones' hair woven into necklaces and brooches. The screaming skull of Betsicombe Manor in England reportedly emits moans when removed from the house. In ancient Rome, there were professional mourners who were paid to cry dramatically at funerals. A coffin saved Abraham Lincoln's body from multiple grave robbing attempts. At one point, his corpse was hidden under a pile of wood and reburied in secret. In New Orleans, the above-ground crypts were not just used for flooding issues, but because they double as natural cremation ovens in the summer heat. Some bodies decompose so slowly, they become adipociere, a waxy soap-like substance that preserves them eerily well. The Whistlers, or Los Sibones, are a Latin American ghost tale, spirits that announce their presence by whistling. The closer the sound seems, the farther they are, and vice versa. We've only explored about 5% of the ocean, meaning we know more about Mars than we do about our own sea floor. There may be a mirror version of you in a parallel universe. Quantum theory suggests endless versions of reality, somewhere you're rich, famous, or already a ghost. In 2020, scientists have detected a signal from space that repeated every 16.35 days, and they still don't know why. Time passes slightly faster at the top of a skyscraper than at the bottom due to gravitational time dilation. If a black hole approached Earth, you wouldn't see it till it started stretching light around it, and by then you're already doomed. The Earth might be inside a giant cosmic void, a region with fewer galaxies and less matter than average. We could be in the universe's quiet corner. If the sun was replaced with a black hole of equal mass, the Earth's orbit wouldn't change. We would just freeze in darkness instantly. Some scientists believe that reality might be a simulation. Your entire life could be running on someone else's hard drive. People have woken up from comas speaking fluent foreign languages they never studied. The Mandela effect is when a large group remembers something incorrectly, like believing Nelson Mandela died in prison. It's often used to argue for alternative timeline. People who suffer from phantom phone vibration syndrome, feeling their phone vibrate when it hasn't, is reoccurring across the world. You can experience false memories so vividly that you swear they're real, even for things that never happened. A rare condition called synesthesia makes people taste words or see sounds as color. Some people can't picture things in their head at all. It's called aphantasia. They literally have no mind's eye. During intense deja vu, parts of your brain linked to memory and danger detection light up, almost like it's warning you of something. A sleep disorder called REM behavior disorder makes people act out their dreams, sometimes violently. The brain can survive for up to 10 minutes without oxygen, but awareness is usually gone after about 30 seconds. The Hope Diamond is said to curse anybody who possesses it. Owners have died in bizarre accidents, madness, and ruin. In 2004, a haunted painting titled "The Hands Resist Him" was sold on eBay. Viewers claim to feel dizzy, nauseous, or sense something watching them through the screen. King Tut's tomb curse supposedly killed several archaeologists, mysteriously. Some from odd infections, others from unexplainable circumstances. The Chair of Death in Thirsk, England, has allegedly caused fatal accidents to anybody who sits in it. It's now suspended high on a wall to prevent further deaths. A stolen piece of lava rock from Hawaii is rumored to curse tourists who take it. Hundreds of people have mailed their rocks back. The Dybbuk box is said to contain a malicious Jewish spirit and has been blamed for hauntings, illnesses, and even death. It inspired the movie The Possession. Robert the Doll, housed in Key West, Florida, is said to blink, move, and curse visitors who disrespect him. Letters of apology cover his display. The Bassano vase, made in Italy, allegedly killed every person who ever owned it. Now it's hidden in a secret location. A mirror in the Myrtles plantation is believed to have trapped the spirits of a murdered family. Visitors report seeing faces appear in the glass. In the 19th century, some families installed coffin torpedoes, spring-loaded shotguns inside caskets to deter grave robbers. Premature burial was so feared in the 1800s that people installed safety coffins with bells, flags, or breathing tubes. In Madagascar, families practice the turning of the bones, where they dig up their relatives, dressing them, and dancing with their corpses. A mass grave in Venice contained a woman buried with a brick jammed in her mouth, believed to be a vampire who spread plague. In 2008, a woman in Argentina married the man who murdered her own twin sister. Body farms exist around the world where human corpses are studied in open air for forensic research. Vultures, bugs, and time are the professors. The Murder Castle, built by H.H. Holmes in Chicago, had trapdoors, secret torture rooms, and gas lines running to guest rooms. In ancient times, people thought redheads would become vampires because they were seen as untamable and unnatural. The Bunny Man of Virginia is a legend of a man in a bunny suit who haunts a bridge linked to an escaped convict and unsolved killings. Cropsey was a Staten Island legend of a killer in the woods. It turned out to be a real man named Andre Rand, who was convicted of child abduction. There's a stretch of road in New Jersey called Shades of Death Road. No one agrees how it got its name: murder, plague, or native curses. The Goatman of Maryland is part man and part goat. He is also blamed for disappearances, car wrecks, and mutilated animals. The black-eyed children phenomenon involves kids with jet black eyes asking to come inside of homes and cars, often followed by illness or bad luck. The Limp Mansion in St. Louis is one of America's most haunted houses. 4 members of the Limp family died by suicide there. In Kentucky, Hell's Gate Bridge supposedly shows a vision of hell if you drive over it with your headlights off. The phantom social worker panic of 1990s involved people posing as government workers trying to steal children. None of them were ever caught. In Iceland, stories persist of trolls that turn to stone in sunlight. Several natural formations claim to be their remains. In Japan, there is a forest so notorious for suicides that police put up signs urging people to reconsider and to never go off a path. Logan Paul should not return there. The Axeman of New Orleans, who appeared from 1918 to 1919, told residents to play jazz music or be killed. The murders stopped, and then he vanished. Ed Gein, the inspiration for Psycho in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, made furniture from human skin. In 1945, the Sodder children vanished from a house fire. No bodies were found, and decades later, the family received a photo claiming to be one of them. In 1987, a man hijacked a TV broadcast in Chicago wearing a Max Headroom mask and said bizarre things. Nobody knows who it was. A woman in Florida found a hidden room behind her kitchen pantry with evidence that somebody had been living there. There are actually cold cases involving phone calls from the dead with voices that are recognized by family members. In the 1980s, a New Orleans man pretended to be a vampire, killed and drank his girlfriend's blood. In 1971, John List murdered his family, left classical music playing, and left for 18 years. He was caught after America's Most Wanted aired his story. In Russia, a woman known as the Doll Maker dug up corpses of girls, dressed them up, and kept them as companions. Serial killer Herb Baumeister's house is now a hotspot for paranormal investigators. Dozens of men's remains were found in the woods. People with Capgras syndrome believe their loved ones have been replaced by an identical imposter. The third man factor is when people near death feel a comforting presence guide them, reported by explorers, climbers, and trauma survivors. There are people who remember every day of their life in perfect detail. It's called highly superior autobiographical memory. The psychological condition known as bonethropy makes people believe they are cows or oxen. Some literally graze on grass. The hum is a mysterious low-frequency sound heard in isolated places around the world. It drives some people to madness, but no source has ever been confirmed. If you stare into the mirror in dim enough light, your brain can cause your face to morph into a monstrous, unfamiliar form. It's called the strange face illusion. The Gansfield effect happens when your senses are blocked in total monotony. Your brain begins hallucinating to compensate. There's a rare disorder where people believe they're already dead. It's called Cotard's delusion or walking corpse syndrome. The last sense to go before death is usually hearing. People in comas may still hear what you say in their final moments. The Tower of London is said to be haunted by Anne Boleyn, who's often seen carrying her own head. A woman in Gettysburg claims she was pulled into the past when she entered an old barn. She saw Civil War soldiers performing surgery. In 1953, a man fell through a time slip in Times Square and was hit by a car. He had 19th century clothing on and 70-year-old coins. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall had been photographed and reported floating down the stairs, glowing eyes with no feet. The Queen Mary ocean liner is considered one of the most haunted places in the US, with reports of ghostly children playing in the drain pool. Some claim ghosts can show up on infrared photographs, even when they're not seen by the naked eye. In the filming of The Exorcist, 9 people associated with the movie died before it was complete. At Leap Castle in Ireland, visitors report feeling a crushing, choking presence in the Bloody Chapel, which was once used for ritual sacrifice. The Visca Axe Murder House in Iowa offers overnight stays. Many visitors leave in the middle of the night due to intense activity. In the Philippines, a creature called the White Lady appears in the rearview mirror and is said to cause fatal accidents. Pope Formosus was put on trial after he died. They dug him up, dressed him in papal robes, and found him guilty. His body was thrown in a river. In the 19th century, it was legal in the US to mail children through the postal system. One baby was mailed to grandma for 53 cents. In 1518, a law in England made it a criminal offense to impersonate a ghost. A Scottish clan in the 16th century, the Sawney Bean family, reportedly murdered and ate over 1,000 people before being executed. Some mummies in ancient Egypt were ground into powder and used as medicine or paint pigment in Europe. In the 18th century France, a man trained a pig to kill himself in front of a court to prove that animals could be guilty for murder. The pig was hanged. Viking warriors were sometimes buried with slave sacrifices, weapons, and boats so they could reign in the afterlife. In ancient Rome, people believed ghosts could be driven away with loud sounds, garlic, or donkey urine. Benjamin Franklin's old London home had a secret basement where 15 skeletons were found, and no one knows why. Bat Squatch was sighted near Mount St. Helens after the eruption in 1980, a creature with bat wings, fur, and glowing red eyes. In West Virginia, the Flatwoods Monster was seen descending from a UFO, green mist, glowing eyes, and a long coat. The Popelick Monster of Kentucky is said to be part goat, part man, and lures people onto train trestles where they're hit by trains. The Loveland Frogman of Ohio is a 4-foot tall frog-like creature reported to carry a magic wand that sparks. The Ahul is a giant bat-like creature said to live in the jungles of Java and is often mistaken for a small pterodactyl. In 1977, people in Dover, Massachusetts saw a creature with a melon-shaped head and glowing orange eyes. They nicknamed it the Dover Demon. The Enfield Horror of Illinois has 3 legs, red eyes, and made squealing noises. Police and townfolk reported it. The Lizard Man of Scrape Ore Swamp in South Carolina is reported to attack cars and livestock in the 1980s. Quantum entanglement means 2 particles can instantly affect each other's state even if they're light years apart. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Water bears can survive boiling, freezing, radiation, and the vacuum of space. Some mushrooms communicate using electrical impulses or a fungal internet called the mycellular network. A man in England disappeared in front of witnesses in 1763 after walking into a blue light during a storm. He was never seen again. Number stations are mysterious shortwave radio broadcasts that repeat a string of numbers, tones, or beeps. Some believe they're spy codes. In 2000, an online post by John Teeter claimed he was a time traveler from 2036. He gave details about war computers and black holes. An Italian woman called her own phone while being attacked. Her voice answered and said, "I'm not home right now." In the 1990s, a woman received voicemails from her deceased husband that included details that nobody else could have known. A man in California set up motion cameras in his cabin and found pictures of himself asleep, taken by an unseen person or an entity. In Japan, there's a ghost poem called Tamino's Hell. Reading it out loud is believed to bring misfortune or even death. In 1567, a man famous for his 4.5-foot long beard tripped on it and broke his neck, dying instantly. A Tennessee tailor named David Bucknell wanted to make a statement about fossil fuels. He self-immolated in a parking lot using gasoline. Betty and Barney Hill reported being abducted in 1961. Their story included medical procedures, star charts, and a missing 2-hour time window. The Appalachian region is full of tales about witch trees, twisted dead trees where witches were hung or buried upside down under. In eastern Kentucky, the Pink Lady of Pikeville is a ghost seen weeping in the cemetery wearing a pink dress and holding a broken rose. Old-timers in Kentucky say if you hear 3 knocks at your door and nobody's there, death is nearby. Haints in Appalachian lore are restless spirits that target the guilty and cannot cross a blue door, hence the use of haint blue paint on porches. There's a cursed road called Narrows Road near Erlanger, Kentucky, and it's said to cause drivers to hallucinate shadow people in time slips. The Wampus Cat is a half-woman, half-panther said to stalk the forest of Appalachia. The woman was cursed by tribal elders. Some locals believe the Mammoth Cave system is a spiritual gateway and that its endless dark tunnels hold more than just rock. They think it holds a gateway to the afterlife. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for right now. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like, favorite, subscribe, whatever you need to do. But hopefully you come back for another video. Let me know what you want me to do in the comments down below. Other than that, thank you all. I love you all. Bye.